Hello everybody, we are going to be painting some birch bark for birch trees, and it's a really simple technique. So let's jump in. The first thing that you want to do is basically you could dirty up some water, and we're basically going to use dirty water. So the paint to water ratio is mostly water and just a little bit of pigment. So that's how we start out. And you can do this on a separate piece of paper so that you can test and make sure that you're pretty transparent. And then we're using a wet on wet effect, which we will get right into. So I'm going to drag a line all the way down my paper with basically water and then a little bit of pigment, and I'm using a round brush, and you can use any color that you want. This is just kind of a dark gray. And it's going to be just maybe an inch apart or inch wide, and then drag it up to as far as you want to. And this can be pretty imperfect because nature's not perfect. So I'm going to do another one right next to it. And then what you want to do is wait for these to dry halfway. You don't want them all the way dry because you're going to add your details so that they bleed a little bit, but you want to wait till it's mostly dry because otherwise it's going to bleed too much. So this one is actually doing a good job drying pretty fast. So I think I didn't have enough water on my brush. I might actually add a little more water so that So you can tell how wet it is by just tilting your angle of your head, is how you look at it, or you can tilt the paper. And I don't know if you guys can see that the way that I can, but you can see a sheen. So now I'm going to, where it's drier but still wet, take a brown color and just drag it. Like, you can set it down just like this, or you can drag it a little bit so that it is horizontal more, just like a line. And you can see that it starts to just bleed exactly where it should. So don't make these perfectly even. You want to stagger them a bit because nature's imperfect. So, and you can make these thicker if you want, make some thinner. And you're just adding that detail in there. See, I'm looking before I put it down because I can see this part's not wet anymore. And so it's not gonna create what I want. So I can always go in there and push it a little bit with more water, but do make sure that you're wet enough. So I'm gonna come back to that spot, and it looks like this one is just about ready. So I'll go ahead and set some down right here. This is gonna bleed more. So see how that's bleeding too much? It's okay if it does that right off the bat. Just don't be as generous when you set it down, your paint down initially, because you wanna see how that's gonna go. And then this is fine because you're doing loose watercolors. So if it's, a little bit more of a reach, totally fine because it just adds to the overall appeal. I'm just adding a couple more dots of pigment here, because when watercolor bleeds, it spreads, and I want it to be a little more obvious that that is, markings in the tree itself. Okay, that's still wet. I'm looking at an angle, so I have this area that looks like it's ready to go. That's a little more like it. It looks like I dipped into my blue. That's fine. Don't dip into your blue. Okay, so, and that's bleeding too much. So now I can see that that's a little too much and I need to save that area. It's fine if you want to leave it, but if you want it to be cleaner, you can take the edge of a paper towel and just kind of dab. Don't wipe, just dab, and then go back in with some water, just water, no color, and just re-drag right here. And then it will re-wet, and then you can kind of reset. And if you want, while you're waiting, you can fill the rest of the paper. Pick up some of that dark color so that it can be more gray so you can actually see what's going on. And you can lay some more down so that those can prepare as you work on your other ones. I've got cat hair in my water. I like to stagger them in height and then also kind of change the spacing of them a little bit so they look more like they're actually in a forest. Okay, this one's looking good. Like, I can add some brown to it, so I'm gonna come in and set my brush down, and it's bleeding exactly how I want it to. So I'm just gonna stagger these as I go down. It's kind of like a sweet spot, like you have to get it, time it just right, because if you miss this window where it's this dry, because it's about to, you know, be even more dry and then it wouldn't bleed. So you gotta really watch for that. All right. And then I encourage going back in and just adding a little water to some that you might want to make thicker. What to note is that these two are touching, so anything that I put too close will actually drag into the next tree. It's not bad that that would happen, but it's just so you know, because you might not want it to. I actually like when things bleed. I'm all about watercolor doing its thing. I just think it adds so much character, so I'm gonna let that happen. And then check the other ones. It looks like this one's a little too dry, so I'm gonna add a little more water to it. And then this one's exactly where I want it now, I think. Yeah, so I'm gonna add that. Detail in. Just know the more you add, the more they're gonna be like a whole bunch that you have to tackle at the same time. So just work quickly. That's why I like to start off with just one or two, so I can kind of get my rhythm going. This one looks like it's still pretty wet, but you can always test it again just by setting something down. Okay, so that's too wet. I'm still gonna wait. And this I think looks pretty. I'm not gonna pick that up because it's like this one, how it has some variation, and it makes it seem like it's more, like it's got some shading to it almost, rather than just being like a flat color like this one is. But again, I love the variation. I think that it adds a lot of interest to your overall finished piece when it has those imperfections. I'm gonna show you, hopefully you can see the sheen that's on that tree. So it's just slight. And that's when I'm ready to jump in. And that's it. That's really all there is to it. So it's mostly just a waiting game to play with the water and then getting your paint to water ratio on point when you are doing your initial wash. So I hope that was helpful, you guys. I can't wait to see your birch trees. Be sure to tag me if you share on social media at the Pigeon Letters so I can see your work.